Good evening. I'd like to open up the meeting and welcome everyone to this, the Ordinary Council meeting for the 13th of March 2018. Moonee Valley City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, ancestors, past and present, and community members. Council also extends their respects to the elders and descendants of any Aboriginal people present here today with us. I'd also like to advise members of the gallery that open session of this meeting are being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recording will also be archived and made available on Council's website. Gallery attendees are advised that their presence may be recorded. Apologies, councillors. I've received one apology for tonight's for non-attendance, and that's from Councillor Andrea Serace. I also remind councillors that Councillor Cusack is on approved leave of absence from tonight's meeting. Do we have any other apologies tonight, councillors? Confirmation of minutes. Councillors, do I have any opposition to any item of the minutes for the ordinary meeting of council held on Tuesday the 27th of February 2008? If no, the minutes are confirmed.
2018.
Oh, sorry, 2018. Yes, you are right. Sorry. Yes, 2008. If no, confirmed. Declarations by councillors. Does any councillor have any conflict of interest in any item on tonight's agenda? No. Presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations this evening? Petitions and joint letters. Councillors, do we have any petitions or joint letters?
Mayor, I have a petition here signed by 39 residents in the St James Street and Grandison Street area in Moonee Ponds, requesting that council repair and restore the laneway between the two streets.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Nash.
Yes, Mayor, I have a petition signed by 23 residents of Heritage Street, Moonee Ponds, requesting council consider implementing a permit parking zone in their street.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Questions from the public. I believe we have 3 questions from the public, and I've asked Natalie Wright to speak to them.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. Brian and Lynn O'Day asked, in Table 5, page 22, the parking impact is considered acceptable, subject to the inclusion of conditions on any permit granted. This is despite submitted plans providing 55% of required parking and the unrealistic assumption only 1 car space is required for each 2-bedroom unit. Given the existing parking pressures in the Ardoch Street and Pentley Grove area, what plans does Council have to address the increased impact from this development of vehicle parking? What confidence can residents have that any plan would be enforced regularly? The proposed reduction of 3 shop car spaces and 1 residential vehicle car space is considered acceptable considering the subject site is within 50 metres of Glenbervie Railway Station and within walking distance of a bus stop. The proposal also provides 5 bicycle parking spaces on site and 1 double-sided bicycle hoop at the front of the shop, which can be utilised by employees, shoppers and visitors to the site. Officers recently undertook a parking investigation in Ardoch Street, Essendon, concluding the collection of parking occupancy services in Ardoch Street between Napier Crescent and Brewster Street met the appropriate number or percentage of available parking spots, with 85% of the car parking spaces consistently unoccupied. That occupancy number within the permit zone meant that there was considerable scope to accommodate additional parking and indeed to lessen the severity of the parking restrictions as part of our review project. We will continue to monitor parking levels in Ardoch Street and Council employs parking control officers to implement the various parking restrictions throughout the municipality. This is actively undertaken. The second question is from Laurie and Rosemary Thompson, who asked, Given Clause 5803-1 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme provides for the development and protection of energy-efficient dwellings, and noting Council has lauded the proposed plan for including a light well to allow significant northern light into the proposed building, how does Council justify approving the plans in circumstances where the development would significantly adversely impact 36 Ardoch Street's access to northern light by overshadowing a light well that provides northern light to 7 large windows to habitable areas and the main private open space at the front of the dwelling? The response is that while the development will impact on the energy efficiency of the adjoining dwelling to the south, the building has been sited and designed to provide light court areas at the first floor level directly abutting existing light court and private open space areas, with a more pronounced recession in built form at the second floor level to ensure energy efficiency of the existing dwelling to the south is not unreasonably reduced. It also is such that the property directly to the south is located within a commercial 1 zone and therefore not afforded the same level of amenity, daylight and solar energy typically attributed to properties within a residential zone. The second part of Laurie and Rosemary Thompson's question is, why has the Council failed to address the concerns raised by 36 Ardoch Street in their notice of objection in the report? The response is that the concerns raised by the adjoining landowner with regard to offsite amenity, overdevelopment, car parking, traffic, construction impacts and errors within the documents have also been discussed within section 3.7 and throughout relevant sections of the report. The third question was from Lindsay and Jennifer Crooks, who asked, how will the Moonee Valley Council allow the overdevelopment of a site in which the proposed development impacts directly upon properties at 39 and 41 Penderley Grove, which abut directly to the proposed development, depriving each family of a safe quality living environment? The response is that the assessment report finds the proposal, subject to conditions, demonstrates an adequate level of compliance with the relevant policies and provisions of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. It's also important to note that the right-of-way to the rear provides an appropriate buffer between residential properties to the east, thereby mitigating direct impacts on these properties.
Thank you, Ms. Reader. Next item on tonight's agenda is 9.1, Council Reports. And Council Report on tonight's agenda is on page 4 and is entitled 38 and 38A Ardoch Street, Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Mayor, I have an alternate motion I'd like to move.
Sure.
I'd like to move that Council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application number MV 628/2017 for the construction of a 3-storey building in a commercial 1 zone and a reduction in car parking requirements at number 38 and 38A Ardoch Street, Essendon, Lot 1 TP 439978L, in accordance with the following grounds of refusal. 1, the proposal fails to meet the overarching objective and strategies of Clause 15.012 Urban Design Principles of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and would result in an urban design outcome that fails to positively contribute to local urban character, enhance the public realm and minimise the detrimental impact on neighbouring properties. 2, the proposal fails to meet the objectives and strategies contained within Clause 15.031 Heritage Conservation and Clause 21.062 Heritage of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and would result in a development that is not sympathetic and does not integrate with surrounding heritage buildings. 3, the proposed building height, form, scale and massing fails to meet the objectives and strategies of Clause 21.064 Urban Design of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, as it fails to appropriately respond to its location and surrounding context. 4, the proposal fails to satisfy the following standards contained within Clause 58 Apartment Developments of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and does not achieve an acceptable outcome in terms of the following objectives. A, Clause 58.021 Urban Context. B, Clause 58.041 Building Setback. C, Clause 58.053 Private Open Space. And D, Clause 58.072 Room Depth. 5, the development would present a visually dominant and unsympathetic building form to the area and will have adverse effect on the residential amenity of neighbouring land. 6, the proposal fails to provide sufficient car parking as required under clause 52.06 car parking of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and would exacerbate car parking problems in the surrounding area. Nearly there, sorry. 7, the proposal will cause adverse traffic and pedestrian safety impacts on the surrounding area, including the rear laneway and adjoining local road network, which will be substantial and unreasonable. And 8, the proposal represents an overdevelopment of the site.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gauci, would you like to speak to the item?
I will, thank you. Obviously, the refusal is quite specific around the number of concerns we have.
Ignore
Sorry.
that.
That's okay. I was like, I haven't spoken for quite my time. But a summary of the key issues that arise for me, the site's 7.5 metres wide. So in terms of waste management of that number of units, the waiver of 4 car parks is nearly half of the requirement. A shop is provided but has no kitchen or bathroom or parking facilities. Whilst it's zoned commercial, the properties either side are solely residential. For me, there's impacts of additional traffic down laneway. That's assuming the stackers actually get used at all, given we all know how stackers tend to be used. There are significant light and shadow impacts on the Lightwell courtyard and private open space of the residents at 36. They will be in permanent darkness. But above all else for me, there's really poor design outcomes with regard to noise. So there's windows and bedrooms that are next to noise sources such as lifts and car stackers. There's really poor design outcomes in terms of storage, light and accessibility. All of those requirements have to be conditioned if it was to meet the standard. So for me, it's just not a great proposal for this area.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just rise. Yes, I certainly agree with my colleague and fellow councillor Gauci Marucci, ward councillor that is. The scale of this proposed development is quite excessive, and the height and bulk of the overall development is excessive. And for those that have walked down Ardoch Street in Essendon and seen how magnificent the heritage buildings are in this area, you would have to almost have tears in your eyes to think that a proposal like this would be developed. Granted, it's a commercial zoning. However, it's a very old zoning that maybe needs to be reviewed, and that's something that our planning department, I'm sure, has got in hand. However, getting back to the actual proposal, the overall overdevelopment in terms of the dwelling density and the excess site coverage is something that concerns me greatly. For me, poor urban design outcomes for an area that cries out heritage just doesn't wash with me, and it doesn't cut the mustard. It's really just a proposal because it's close to a station. We're going to whack up another large number of units that meet the so-called requirements, being close to suburban transportation for the public. Well, it's inadequate. The setbacks are inadequate to the property boundaries, and the impacts of the natural airflow, both within the development and to the surrounding properties and the courtyards and the windows that back onto this development, really are not adequate. The increased noise to a quiet suburban heritage listed street are also an issue that we really need to be mindful of. So I can only say that I agree wholeheartedly with my fellow ward councillor to say that this is a development that isn't for Ardoch Street, and certainly will destroy a lot of the great amenity that the heritage listed area has already. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I look at this development, and it's a very difficult one to decide on. We have a proposal here that is in a commercial 1 zone, with a commercial 1 zone abutting it and a 3-storey residential dwelling on the other side of it. It is currently a shop front, so there's no change, I guess, to the use of the shop front in this proposal. The height is the 3 stories, pretty much in line with what's already been built on that corner there in the creamy yellowy building. I completely understand my fellow ward councillors' feelings about this proposal, and completely understand the refusal, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get to the consultation meeting, so wasn't able to hear the residents' concerns, but I have been informed of what they were. So with 36 Ardoch Street, I do understand that there will be implications regarding overshadowing particularly from 38, but there's limitations on what zones afford in regards to overshadowing and the like. What you'd expect in a residential zone, less, basically there'd be less, you'd have to have less overshadowing in a residential zone compared to a commercial zone, because that's just what the zone affords. So with these zones sitting abutting each other, I think for me it's a very difficult proposal to decide on, just because of the situation that we're in. So I'm looking forward to hearing from other councillors regarding their thoughts on this. I'll leave it there, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall? No? Okay. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the Buckley Ward councillors for putting up a refusal for this, but I must admit I'm tempted to stick with the officer's recommendation. And basically the reason for doing so, although it's hard, at the end of the day it's in a commercial zone, and not only is it in a commercial zone, it's not right on the edge of a commercial zone. So at 36 Ardoch, they're also in a commercial zone as well. There's already the 3 stories in terms of the bulk and scale. When you stack it up against Res Code, everything is compliant. The 2 things that aren't compliant are the private open space objective and the room depth objective, which has been written into the report as to why they're reasonable, and which I agree with. I think in terms of being 7.5 metres wide, there's going to be some issues. There's no doubt about it that it's a narrow block. But again, it's zone commercial. In terms of the waiver of the car parks, again, close to a bus station, close to a train station, I think you could even argue that we're lucky that this one isn't coming to us at 4 stories. If we were to reject this and take it to VCAT, I think it would be laughed at. And I don't think that there would be a better outcome. I think that the way that the officers have conditioned this report is quite acceptable. I just don't think that this would be an appropriate one for a refusal, and that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. We always face challenges in council when we're dealing with planning applications where you have residential interfaces and commercial zones. But as you go through this process, as some of us have repeatedly, you see patterns and you see trends, and you certainly understand how the tribunal looks at issues such as amenity. And I remember very clearly a planning application that we had, also not zoned in not residentially zoned land, where the person was going to have a wall from their only light source, which was a matter of metres away. And we fought quite hard on the issue around light and we were unsuccessful at the tribunal. There's another example I can think of, again, in commercially zoned land on Pascoe Vale Road, where almost this exact situation, where you have a light well and it was a beautifully renovated home in commercially zoned land, but ultimately that commercial zoning is viewed very differently to residential zoning, and as much as we might like to wish it was otherwise, it's just not. So sometimes when you look at the situation, in this instance we're looking at a small block 50 metres from the train station. We're looking at a block that has existing built form of 3 stories, just a matter of metres away. So you sort of do that balancing act where you think, okay, I absolutely understand the concerns of residents and I am incredibly sympathetic. But we also know how these do play out, and we also know that sometimes you're better off looking at how do you condition the particular areas of concern to try and address, to the extent you possibly can, the amenity issues. And certainly there have been a significant number of conditions imposed, if this were to be approved, that would mitigate some, not all, but some of those concerns around amenity and around design. So for me, again, you've just got to be mindful about where it is located, and this is a really difficult situation where you have properties that people live in, and they think of them as homes, and they think of them as, they love them, and that's totally understandable. But where they have an underlying commercial zone, not a residential zoning, that carries with it a whole range of, I suppose, of negative impacts, potentially, or negative consequences. And unfortunately, in this instance, my concern, one of my other concerns, is along the lines of those expressed by Councillor Byrne, that it's very rare nowadays that in a commercial zoning directly opposite a railway station that you see 3 stories. That is definitely on the lower side, unfortunately, and 4+ is much more common.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak?
I will briefly, thank you, Mayor. Look, like my fellow councillors, this is a somewhat hard application to decide on, and I think in this instance it's not the application per se, but it's the zones and local and state planning framework that make this application a viable prospect. The zoning is the biggest issue in the sense for objectors that it is a commercial zone, and directly north and south it is a commercial zone, and therefore it has to be assessed in the zoning it is in. Similarly, it doesn't have a heritage overlay on the site. I acknowledge RDoC and Peter Lee definitely have a fairly intactness row of properties on both sides of the street, and I completely understand that residents want to keep that intactness, but this particular property does not have an overlay, and subsequently the Heritage Advisor has suggested that as per the Borough Charter 99, in a heritage area, new buildings should be contemporary builds to contrast the older character of the area rather than mimic the existing builds. And that's picked up in the planning report, and that's probably a fairly subjective point, but it is something that we have often looked at within council planning applications, that the heritage advice is more to go for contemporary to contrast rather than to mimic. The other thing we have to look at is we do have our own local planning policies which suggest that we need to provide new dwellings close to transport arterials and close to activity centres. This particular application is probably 20-30 metres from Glenbervie Station. So again, for the objector's point of view, this is unfortunately located extremely close to a public transport arterial, and subsequently complies with that element of our planning scheme. I'm not speaking to the merit of the application per se, but the reality is, because of its zone, because of its location, and because of the local planning policy, that as a councillor, to do my due diligence, I can't support the refusal as much as I personally would like to. I'm guided by the rules that we set in place as a council, and the zones that are in place on the location.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, I would just like to foreshadow if this motion is lost.
We don't need to foreshadow on planning applications. Councillor Gauti Marucci, would you like to close?
Thank you. Just briefly, thank you to the other councillors for their feedback. I think for all of us, I see something going here. I see apartments going here. It's obviously going to have an element of retail because it's a commercial zone. I just would prefer to see something that's actually well designed and complements the area and complements the actual residents that are going to live in the building as well as the neighbours. So for me, in my heart of hearts, I can't do anything but support a refusal. So thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the alternative?
Councillor Gauci Marucci, Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, councillors. Would someone like to move the officer's recommendation in regards to 9.1? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, I would like to move a motion, and I would like it to be in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, councillor. We'll have a seconder. Councillor Byrne. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, I'm mindful, obviously, we've debated the issue previously. Some of the concerns in relation to the internal amenity issues were ones that I think Councillor Gauci Marucci expressed well, and they were ones that I had concerns about. Again, via conditions, we're able to deal with most of those. The acoustics report will be important, and I think that will perhaps lead to some tweaking around how, from an internal perspective, this works. And again, one of the issues that we constantly hear about is concerns around waste, understandably, and a waste management plan sets out how that waste process will occur, and again, where you have permit conditions, in the event that they are not complied with, obviously council can and does take enforcement action. Certainly, very much understand the concerns around car parking. But again, noting its proximity to the railway station and having seen this situation play out time and time again, we know that parking waivers in areas that are so close to public transport are ones that are viewed favourably by the tribunal. And again, they're ones that it's an area where that sort of the lack of car parking is not fatal to an application so close to public transport. So I think we've probably discussed it. I always like to mention in relation to the construction impacts, because they are issues of incredible concern to people, and understandably, but that will be dealt with separately if this were to be approved by a construction management plan, and those concerns around amenity and how the construction process will be managed will be dealt with in there, and again will form part of any permit, so that if not complied with will be able to be enforced.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've already spoken on this, so on the refusal, so I don't really need to speak much more, but I'll just reiterate to everyone that it's zoned commercially, and it's not residential, and we have to do our due diligence when going through these applications and think with our head and not our heart all the time. Thanks.
Any other councillor would like to speak? Councillor Sharp.
Just quickly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I apologise to the residents for not being able to support a refusal, but based on what we have before us, I need to assess every development application before us on merit. The commercial zone, as other councillors have alluded to or mentioned, certainly changes the impact of this proposal, and a refusal just just couldn't support the refusal. But I do understand and acknowledge the impact it will have, but and I understand 36 is a residence, not commercial, but the commercial zone is what is applied and is what has to be referred to, and this development proposal is not on the residential interface, it's one back. So happy with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's only with disappointment that I listened to my other councillors, and I'm disappointed for the residents more so than my own personal situation. It's sure it is a commercial zone, and we understand the implications of that, and so forth. But I think to keep the trust and the importance that this has to the local residents, both in Ardoch Street and behind in Pentley Street, or Pentley Grove, I think it is, that they do have cause for concern and major concern that their area, that they've bought a house which is a home to them for families and so forth, is being transformed by an apartment block. Sure, there's one in Napier Crescent already. However, this is bringing it further into Ardoch Street, and I hate the precedent that these type of things create, and they creep and they creep and they creep. And you only have to look at Moonee Ponds to see how these things transpire over time. Scott Street's a very good example of that, where apartment blocks just slowly force their way down the street, and what was once a beautiful historic area with heritage overlays has turned into a rabbit warren. And so I just be mindful of that this is potentially what's going to occur. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Any other? Councillor Gauci-Rabucci.
Just briefly, I just wanted to again note my concerns with the proposal and my obvious objection to the proposed motion.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Nation.
Obviously, just speaking again, and this time in support of the motion, I do want to assure objectors and residents that by supporting this this motion, it in no way means I have a diminished view of the heritage and character of the area. This particular property, as I said previously, is a victim or a benefit to the zone it is in, and so is 36. And if those zones need to be changed, then that's a whole separate process. But in terms of creep up suburban streets, yes, we have seen it in many occasions. This in particular, hopefully, the sheer fact that the zone stops on the the zone stops on the southern side of 36 will reduce that creep. I think as councillors we quite often make decisions that are quite emotive. We also, however, have to acknowledge what planning controls we have put in place, both us and previous councils before us. And as I said last meeting, and I often have said that sometimes the issue is not the application, it's either the planning scheme or the zones, and that's what in this case has probably undone this application from an objector's point of view, rather than the actual merits of the application.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
Look, I will, just to address the concern that we've all sort of touched on around that potential creep, or whatever you may like to call it. There are a few greater protections that a property can have than to be residentially zoned and to have a heritage overlay. So certainly a significant number of properties around here do, and that should provide some comfort to residents, because that is something that as a council we fight hard to protect. And I've often said, and I repeat it now, that the rules are, as Councillor Nation has said, the rules are what council over time has created particular sites. And if you don't like the rules, then you change the rules, but you can't just ignore them. And unfortunately, in this instance, we have that exact situation where that commercial zoning dictates in so many ways what can go on the site. And again, the proximity to the railway station, all of those things are what the rules that apply to this particular site. And they're the things that we have to look at in this particular context. And it is very difficult and it is very hard to make these decisions, because we are all very much aware of how much people love their homes and how much they want to protect them. But again, we're faced with this set of circumstances and we need to make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne.
All those against? Oh,
Councillor
Nation.
Nation.
all those against?
Councillor Gauci-Marici, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, councillors. Before next item on tonight's agenda, I'd just like to advise the live stream audience, the gallery and the councillors that our timer, that the buzzing noise that you heard before, has been not cooperating tonight, so it'll be my discretion to see how long I think 5 minutes and 3 minutes and 2 minutes will be. So you might have to take advantage of me tonight. But I'd also like to acknowledge that we have a special guest here with us tonight. We have the Mayor of Cardinia, Colin Ross, here to come and look and see how we run our meetings and how our live streaming is going. So thank you for attending here, Mayor Ross. The next report on tonight's agenda is on 9.2 and it's on response to notice of motion 2017-16, development in Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move a motion that has the first point as per the officer's recommendation. So I will actually read it out, and apologies for shuffling paper. I'd like to move that Council 1 notes this report, and 2, that a further report be brought back to Council at an ordinary Council meeting within a month of adoption of the MV 2040 Big Ideas Matrix, Developer Contribution Plan and 22-year Capital Plan, setting out the proposed timeframe for implementation of the measures mentioned in this report.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Thanks, Mayor. So this came out of a notice of motion I put forward some time ago that I was appreciative for the support of councillors with that. We talk about rules as we were in the last particular application. Well, this is another example of where council has earmarked areas for high density development, and that's what we're getting. And so when you earmark these areas for high density development, I've obviously been critical, perhaps is the best way to put it, about some of those decisions around the boundaries, and they weren't ones that I would have made, but I'm mindful that we've got what we've got. So one of my concerns though, and I don't know whether anyone had the opportunity to watch the Four Corners piece last night, which was quite fascinating, but one of the concerns that I've had is that we as a council, where we've earmarked an area to say this is where development should go, that we need to be on the front foot when it comes to infrastructure, and we need to show people that we have a plan. And that was the thing that resonated last night so much through that Four Corners piece, that I thought was very timely. We need to be able to say to the people, particularly of Moonee Ponds, but obviously surrounding areas, you know what, this is what is happening here, so what we need to do is we need to be able to say to you, this is how, in relation to these particular concerns you have around development, what council's plan is to address those. And we need to be able to clearly articulate those, say when it's going to happen, what's going to happen and how it is going to be paid for. I think the report set out a few trends, and I appreciate the work that has gone into the detailed report too from officers to pull it all together. And certainly that trend towards an ageing population and also towards single person households is one that is in so many ways going to change neighbourhoods, and it's one that we have to be able to plan for. You can certainly see, obviously, parking. It's an issue that certainly in our neck of the woods in Moonee Ward comes up constantly, and also I acknowledge too in Buckley and probably to a slightly lesser extent in Rosehill, but still it's an issue. And so the report sets out some of the planning that we can do, certainly in relation to autonomous vehicles, which I'm hoping they are the saviour that everyone is expecting them to be. But we need to be on the front foot in relation to how we address even issues with the introduction of autonomous vehicles. The report refers to the shuttle service that we've got going. And apologies, Mayor, I might just have your indulgence for when you're counting internally to have a slightly longer period of time. I will speak very quickly.
Very.
Well, we have a short agenda tonight, so please indulge me. The shuttle service, and again, we've got to try and encourage as many people as possible, but this is something that Council is trying to say, you know what, for people who are working in the MPAC, you can catch a shuttle service from the racecourse and head over there. So that means that you're freeing up parking that enables residents, or I should say people who are going to be in the MPAC, buying things, doing whatever they want to be doing. So for me, again, it's something that we really need to be looking at, these types of things, and we need to have the traders to support that. That is the main thing that we need. We've obviously got the car parking project, parking pods to help show where car parkings are, and also importantly to the plan to address car parking restrictions and to look at them and think, all right, is this actually working at the moment? One of the things that was reassuring to me is that idea of a precinct analysis and to look at how movements occur, and not just vehicle movements, but how importantly pedestrian and cyclist movements will occur in and around the precinct, because it is just going to be essential for it to be functioning well. The streetscape works, again, which is a vital part of this piece of the puzzle, because I think at the moment that there would be no one sitting around here who would say that Moonee Ponds, the precincts around there, they do look a bit tired, and that's work that we have acknowledged, and there are some really quite exciting ideas that are going to come out of that about how we make this be a place where people want to be, they want to linger, they want to go and have their coffee or their food or whatever it is, or buy whatever it is, but to support the precinct. And it's about that placemaking and that creation of spaces for people. Importantly too, the report refers to kindergartens and schools and aged care, youth and other services. And the idea that we might redevelop the civic precinct.
Have 1 minute, Councillor.
I'll be done before then, I can assure you. So that, again, is that opportunity about making sure that if we are having additional people, we are thinking about the needs of both existing and new residents. The waste services, I'm very pleased to see that potential trial at the Moonee Valley Racecourse. And I think, though, we do need to change the terminology a bit. I think the idea of a curbside collection, because that brings to it the mind of having bins strewn out along the curb, when what actually we're talking about if council pickups occur is that heading down into a basement and picking up rubbish from there. So just very briefly, the second point of the motion is around saying, okay, we've got all these ideas about how to address particular issues. Once we've ticked off the other pieces of the puzzle, which are mentioned in the motion, then we need to have a report back to say, okay, so this is the what, and this is the how, and this is the when.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm not sure if the convention is to stand or to sit, so
Stay
please
seated.
take no offence at me staying seated in this instance. I thank Councillor Marshall for her initial notice of motion and addressing what is and will be such a significant challenge for our council and for our community. And when you read through the report and you see the anticipated or estimated population growth figures by ID, the municipality is expected to grow by about 40% in population from 2016 to 2041. Moonee Ponds is expected to grow by 100%, which is a huge increase, and therefore we need to have the foresight to look at how we not only provide for that community, but how we develop everything that Moonee Valley 2040 is about creating that neighbourhood and with a lot of different developments either going up or being in the pipe works, the creation of that neighbourhood is really essential. And how you do that, be it through provision of services, through public spaces, even just through connectivity from station to junction to shopping centres, I think is really important. And how we can utilise developer contributions to put back into that public space and to create that neighbourhood feeling. One of the reasons that we need to be really thoughtful about how we invest and how we invest our developer contributions, but how we help develop Moonee Ponds as a council is when you look at some of the figures that are in the report, and page 46 notes the anticipated future population characteristics of Moonee Ponds, an 86% increase in one adult households, which is much greater than a lot of than every other suburb. And
1 minute, councillor.
Thank you. And subsequently, the creation of those neighbourhoods and those facilities to enable people who might close the door and that's all they see of their neighbours, and even though they live down the hall, I think is essential. I won't go on any further. Councillor Marshall has covered this in good depth, but I do look forward to this obviously well and truly not being the final part of the process. When we do get that completion of MV 2040, then we really do need to have an extra hard look at Moonee Ponds and making it an area that not only people want to reside in, but can reside in because there are the services and the facilities and the spaces for people to enjoy living in that area.
Thank you, councillor. Would any other councillor like to say a few? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a comprehensive report, and I do thank the officers for providing it. There are concerns for me, particularly in the health issues that have really been highlighted at the back of the Appendix A, and I might just quickly run through a few of those. Aberfeldy Ward, 58% of people are overweight or obese, and it has the highest proportion of residents in Moonee Valley with high blood cholesterol. That's Aberfeldy. Airport West, 62% of people are overweight or obese. Ascot Vale, hang on, I've just got to go back to this one, sorry. 60% people overweight or obese. Now, we're going through each of these and nearly all of them seem to relate to sorry, I've jumped ahead.
Yes.
Sorry, I picked the wrong report. I do apologise.
That's all right, councillor Lawrence.
I will come back to it in the next report.
Sure.
Pardon.
Would any other councillor like to speak to
A
the
point of clarification, that data was included in 9.2 in the report. It is. It's not relevant to the item, but it is included in there. But it may be more complementary to the to 9.3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Apologise, Mr Mayor.
That's all right. Would any other councillor like to speak to this item? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
So, sorry, no one else wanted to speak. That's all right. Sorry, I just got caught napping then.
That's it?
For me, I speak more slowly than you, dear Mayor. Look, for me, this is about human beings like to know that there is a plan. They like to know that someone's got things in hand and that people have thought about issues that are important to them and that they have a way of addressing those issues. And that's what this was about. And it rose from concerns that particularly the Moonee Ward councillors, but other councillors I know have had expressed to them about development in Moonee Ponds. And so if we can go out there once we get the next report back and say, okay, so your concern is around this, this is the plan that we as a council have to address it, and this is how we are going to pay for it. And Councillor Nation has raised an important point about the developer contributions, and this is something that I, from my first go in council, was really keen on making sure that we had a developer contribution plan in place. But it's not going to be the be-all and end-all. We are still going to have to make sure that we put in significant amounts of money so that the people of Moonee Ponds have the resources and have the infrastructure and the services that they deserve.
Thank you, Councillor. I put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.3 on tonight's agenda is on page 48 as entitled Waste Management Plan Guidelines for Planning Applicants. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Now I'm worried that there's some hidden controversy that I've totally missed. Look, these guidelines are really quite important in so many ways because they provide guidance for planning applicants around how they need to plan their waste management. We obviously know, as discussed in the last motion, that we have significant numbers of multi-unit developments occurring, and so these waste management plans have to be lodged for planning applicants where there are 6 or more units proposed in relation to a particular application. We also have the situation sometimes where council also imposes via conditions the requirement to have a waste management plan. Now, what they do is the guidelines provide guidance in relation to the types of things and the issues that need to be addressed in the plans. Absolutely. And just really briefly, a couple of the main points, obviously the point about avoiding council laneways for collection wherever possible. Again, we all love our laneways, but this is a really important point because that should be a collection point of last resort. Certainly they specify requirements for on-site storage for hard waste, organics and other types of waste also. Really importantly, and this is becoming an issue of increasing concern, is about the idea of the requirement to actually limit the number of waste collections per week. And the reality is that while there might be some benefits seen to having private waste collections, there are also amenity and environmental impacts that go along with those. And as we have increasing numbers of multi-unit developments, we don't want Moonee Valley streets to just be filled with trucks coming in and out constantly, removing waste. So for me, the ability of council to look at potentially servicing some of the multi-unit developments, if we determine that it's appropriate in the particular circumstances, is really, really important. And again, it's not going to be the curbside 5 million bins strewn out in the front of your street. It's about saying, okay, well, these, you head down into the basement and you pick up the waste. And if council can get to that point where we think, you know what, this will actually work better, it will reduce the amenity and environmental impacts that come with having 1 million trucks on our streets, and I think that that's a really positive thing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. The waste management plan as presented to us has some fantastic ideas about both future developments in waste management, such as e-waste, but also probably one of the key complaints that we often get as councillors. It comes to the collection of waste from commercial facilities, and Councillor Marshall's right. It's not always the best option to say or to put in a condition in each planning permit that it's your waste, you deal with it, it's not council's responsibility. Particularly around here, but also down in the southern end and the growing northern end of the municipality. The problem we will have if we continue down that line of you're more than 6 dwellings, you pick up your own rubbish, is that there'll be trucks going in and out of our city, picking up commercial waste bins, commercial recycling bins, and it will actually affect the residential amenity in a negative way. So this waste management plan looks at how council can possibly integrate our collection services into these developments. It also looks at how, if there are private pickups, linking them up with council's collection day, which seems pretty obvious, but if residents are going to be woken or put up with the collection of bins down their street on a particular day, it would be good that the commercial bins are collected on that day as well. As I touched on, the e-waste stuff is important, the charity bin stuff is important, and so is the separation of residential and commercial waste within developments. And this plan, this policy also looks at not just where commercial waste and waste is stored within a facility, but also controls right down to how you wash out those facilities, how you deal with vermin, and how and where they are collected, also how much of the street frontage the bins can take up, even right down to where they can be kept within the building and the development. So I really commend council for thinking outside the box a little bit and not just palming off the responsibility to developers and to the planners, because it actually, as I said, may have a more beneficial impact for council to be somewhat involved in the process, if not just the discussion, particularly given, as we heard in the previous item, that growth, particularly around here, is going to increase, 40-fold in the municipality, 40% in the municipality and 100% in Moonee Ponds.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 9.4 on tonight's agenda is on page 56 as entitled Community Facilities Policies and Implementation Plans. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauci-Marucci.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Gauci-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
I'm sure we have all heard me speak somewhat extensively about 2040 now.
Sure we have.
So I will keep it brief. As Councillor Lawrence mentioned earlier in some of the health stats, there's a fairly comprehensive appendix to this item in the agenda that talks about the scale and the scope of change in each of our neighbourhoods. And this just supports that work to say where should our community facilities be supported around those areas. So it's a very comprehensive document and the team have done significant work preparing it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is quite comprehensive and very detailed. I've read through it a couple of times, but I certainly don't want to miss anything, which is why I've read it a few times. I do note that the Nidri Library in here is mentioned as part of Keeler Road. I had it up here just a second ago. And it's flagged to upgrade the library, which I'm certainly looking forward to. This plan, if you want to call it a plan in front of us, is actually very visual in regards to where we want to see ourselves and our community facilities. So there's certainly a lot in it, and I certainly hope that all councillors do have their heads around it, because there's certainly a lot of plans that are being superseded by this plan. So seeing Nidri Library as being earmarked is certainly good. Windy Hill earmarked for better usage of the space, better connection with Essendon and the community generally is great. They're probably our Buckley Ward two big ticket items, I guess. Oh, actually, Nidri Library is in Rosehill now, at the top of the street. But
I wasn't going to correct you.
But look, well, I've been campaigning for that library for a number of years now. So all in all, it's quite a very substantive report, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes from it.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Lawrence, Mark 2.
Well, in actual fact, I was correct originally because it was under 9.2, the appendix. But
yes, you were.
So I stand corrected, but I stand also correct. So just getting back to the health issues and the fact that the report does clearly point out that there's a lot of obesity and overweightness, if I can use that term, within our municipality, and I won't go through them all again, but they, other than our good people down in Flemington, the rest of us are, the rest of the municipality seems to lie in the 58 to 62% of overweight and obese people within our municipality, which is a sad indictment of the people who live here, and maybe it's something that council needs to start some sort of education program to address, to ensure that our good residents are aware of the health issues related to excess weight and obesity. And that's a clear indication that also it affects the cholesterol of our residents, the blood cholesterol, and also a lot of other related health issues. Although I'm not a medical person, but I come from a medical family, and those issues were always brought to bear for me as I was growing up, that too much weight is not a good thing. So I'm not sure how the officers came to get all that information, but I'm glad that they did, and I hope our residents who are certainly listening to this this council meeting are taking note that there is an issue in Moonee Valley that we need to look at, and it relates to obesity. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak to this item? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think this is a great piece of work. Putting it bluntly, it's a $900 million plan for the city for the next 23 years. It's a guide, and it has everything in terms of pavilions down to infrastructure, to advocacy, to everything. And I strongly recommend anyone who is interested to please jump online and have a look. As Councillor Sharp, I think it was, referenced, it does supersede a few documents that we already have. In regards to the health concerns that we might have, Councillor Lawrence, you might be interested to tell your Buckley Ward residents that Active April is about to start, which is a state government initiative, which is great, which our leisure centres are part of. But we also have Active April, obviously in April, and Activate, which will be later on in the year. So I think we're trying. Things can always get improved, but there are options there. In terms of some of the things that I would like to highlight from the plan, a guide is 30% tree canopy cover, which I think is really exciting for this municipality. Things like protection for the Maribyrnong River, master plan for Seal Creek. Everyone knows how much I enjoy the greenery and the natural environment. In terms of individual, I hope you don't mind, I've broken it down into suburbs and Rosehill Ward. Airport West, really like the idea of re-energising the Airport West industrial area, increasing public open space, which is desperately needed, and revitalising Matthews Avenue, Avondale Heights with the population boom that is coming in just off Military Road, the redevelopment of the community hub there in around where the Maternal Child and Health Centre is. I think that it'll be magnificent. Keilor East is obviously broken up into Keilor East and Miliara, but just in general, we're looking at bus routes, improved links in Valley Lake, the ability for Highball Stadium, which has been identified in MV 2040 as a desperate need. In Nidru, the library that Councillor Sharp has spoken about, and whilst most of Strathmore Heights is in Buckley Ward, we do have a couple of streets, and so I think that they will be linked quite well into the Boeing Reserve hub that's there. So it's an amazing piece of work which has taken a long time, but it is important to know that MV 2040 consultation phase will be from the 26th of March until the 27th of April. So whilst everyone is enjoying their hot cross buns, please have a look at the plan and review. And no hot cross buns. Get to the gym, guys. Active April. Please have a look at the plan and submit feedback, because it is $900 million. Big ideas. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Gauci-Marucci, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to reiterate what Councillor Byrne, mentioned, that this is going out for consultation during March and April, and this is your opportunity to tell us if it aligns with your priorities and what you think the outcome's going to be or not. So please, please, please use the opportunity of consultation to give us feedback, because this will be the next 20 years, and in 20 years from now we'll say, but you told us that was okay. So please give us feedback if it's not. And the resounding message through most of the facilities is something we have heard loud and clear from the community around multi-use, multi-purpose facilities that everyone can access and everyone can use. So that features heavily in there.
Thank you, councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council report 9.5 on tonight's agenda is on page 64 and is entitled Land Acquisition Committee. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Council Nation. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
This is pretty procedural, and I just realised I'm actually on the committee, so can I move it? I can.
Yes, you can.
Okay. It's quite procedural. I'm happy to be involved in the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the item?
Just very briefly, it's formalising some interim committee or controls that we put in place earlier, I was going to say earlier in the year, but possibly at the end of last year, which looked at a strategic way of purchasing properties, and it has evolved into the creation of this Land Acquisition Committee, which is a extremely, hopefully will be extremely beneficial committee, given a lot of the needs that we've just discussed in previous items, in trying to create some more community space. So to do so with the formation of a committee also ensures that hopefully from a governance point of view, we are doing providing the best possible governance in this area.
Thank you, councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close?
No, thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda is notice of motion. Councillors, therefore I call on Councillor Marshall to present her notice of motion entitled Changes to Parking Restrictions around Flemington Police Station.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sit down if you like, councillor.
Well, I have stood all this time,
Okay.
but happy in future to have that direction early on. So I would like to move in relation to the proposed parking restriction changes around Flemington Police Station as set out in the letter to residents dated 14th February 2018. Council conduct consultation in accordance with policy and standard council practice with affected residents, the police and other relevant stakeholders to determine appropriate and fair parking arrangements in the vicinity of the police station. And 2, Council confirm the position that the Parking Permit Management Committee does not have the power to change parking restrictions, but rather manage parking permits in accordance with applicable policy.
Thank you, councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to your notice of motion?
One of the things that you deal with often as a councillor, particularly in Moonee, but I also know again in Buckley, are constant requests for parking changes. And again tonight, the petition is an example of that. And certainly, I know the Moonee councillors have constant requests for restrictions to be introduced. And certainly even around Flemington Police Station itself, I know various of us have had numerous requests from residents in Bryant Street or Wellington Street to introduce parking restrictions so that residents can park, because obviously since the PSOs came on board, there have been significant strain on the parking in and around the area. Now, Moonee Ward councillors may not always agree on everything, but the one thing that we have, the 3 of us, consistently done, and I'm not going to say I'm proud of us because it's what you should do, but we have consistently, when we have had residents really at times push the point very, very hard. I've had people say, well, what's the point of councillors if you can't introduce these changes? And, that's a question I'll leave out there. But the 3 of us constantly say, this is the process that applies if you want to have parking restrictions introduced into your area. And, you know, we know the process. It's a well-worn path. It's set out in our policies around looking at the capacity and doing the surveys and then going out to stakeholders and saying, this is the proposal, tell us your views. And as I said, we, in the face at times of pretty significant pressure from community members, say, this is the council policy. Now, I suppose for that reason, it was a surprise when we were contacted by a resident recently to advise that there had been changes to parking restrictions around the Flemington Police Station and that they hadn't been consulted about it. And I actually remember when the woman I spoke with, she said, look, this has happened, and I said, look, I assume that there's been some oversight, or, you know, because I just made the assumption that our usual process had been followed. And it certainly occurred without any consultation with surrounding stakeholders. The police were consulted, but ward councillors weren't aware of the changes either until we got notification from residents. And I suppose the other thing that concerns me is that we were advised that the decision was made by the Parking Permit Management Committee, which, having been through that process of looking at the terms of reference of the committee, it was very much a committee set up to deal with appeals, if you like, for people who otherwise wouldn't be entitled to parking permits, and to turn around and say, well, if you meet these particular criteria, then the permit committee would make decisions around whether they were entitled to some or additional appeals. So for me, look, ultimately this is about fairness, and I note the officer's comments and I'm not dismissing those. I suppose my concern in that lies in the sense that, well, we understand what people will say.
Councillor.
I'm almost done. Thanks, Mayor. You know, we've consulted with people before, and I'm assuming that reference might be to the Flemington Hill LATAM that was done some years ago now, and obviously before the PSOs were on board. So there's no doubt that the circumstances in and around here have changed, and those parking pressures are just increasing constantly. So for me, this is just about saying, if we go and defend our process and we stick by it, and we say to people who want the restrictions, this is what has to happen, then we need to make sure, all of us, that that is what actually happens.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I fully concur with Councillor Marshall, and thank you for bringing this to a council meeting at such a in such quick time. I similarly share the same frustration that when residents come to us and submit petitions or requests for parking changes, be it the introduction of a permit zone, be it the provision of a permit because of special circumstances, we refer them to the policy and we refer them to the committee, and that's what we can do within our limitations. And at times that can be frustrating because you understand the frustration of people that live in 100-year-old properties that don't have off-street parking, or you understand that some people are immobile and it's quite hard for them to find a park outside their place of residence when they live near activity centres. And time again, I've harped and responded to saying, look, unfortunately, within my role as a councillor, there's nothing I can do other than refer this to the relevant body. The issue here that Councillor Marshall has raised, I think, is twofold. One is obviously the Parking Permit Management Committee having the capacity to change areas of where permit zones or change on-street parking, which is the issue that Councillor Marshall raised, one of the issues Councillor Marshall raised. But the second relates to probably what is now or must be an outdated parking permit policy, which is our current parking permit policy in 2013. We moved it June in we last modified in June 2017, but it's the 2013 policy, and it does clearly state that a condition of the community service organisation permit, and Victoria Police fall under that category, as I've had clarified in previous documentation. The condition of this particular permit is that it is not used or issued for the purpose of employee all-day parking in the vicinity of their place of employment. So, again, as a councillor and from a resident's point of view, it's frustrating where a resident can say, but your policy says this.
1 minute, councillor.
Thank you. Your policy says this. Why is an exemption given in this case? And the problem is Councillor Marshall and I have not been, and Councillor Cusack, have not been able to give answers to either of the questions. Why have you not been consulted? Or why have we not been consulted? Why have the signs had the capacity to be changed? And why are employees allowed to park with these permits when your policy states they're unable to? This is not in any way a reflection or trying to provide any disservice to the fabulous work the Victoria Police do down in Flemington. It's again that concept of, if our policy at the moment does not match current expectations and arrangements that are required in areas of our municipality, then let's change the policy. Let's not just make decisions that don't comply with our policy, because ultimately there'll be a councillor or a resident that will come to us and make us look extremely foolish. So I thank Councillor Marshall for bringing this notice of motion. I thank her for really reiterating that second point. And I think from a learning, or as a learning from this, we may need to again review the parking permit policy and exactly what it entails in regards to service organisations, the permits that are given, and the permits that are given not for vehicles owned and operated, i.e. police vans, but for employees who then will park near their place of work.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
Just in closing, I certainly reiterate and thank Councillor Nation for raising the point. This is certainly not in any way a reflection on the work that the Flemington Police do. They do a magnificent job and we all know that. But this is about us as councillors being able to go out there and to be able to explain why decisions were made a particular way. It's about the next time someone comes and says, oh, well, hang about, Flemington Police got that, what about us? For us to be able to provide an explanation as to what happened. And that's why the policy is there, and as soon as you start deviating from it, then the whole thing starts to unravel, because you can't put your hand on your heart and say to one, you get this, and say to another, you don't get it.
Thank you, councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any urgent business? I saw Councillor Lawrence first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'd just like to make my intention to move a motion in relation to officers providing extra watering to small trees and shrubs in Moonee Valley City Council during the months of March and April 2018, unless we receive adequate rainfall in the meantime.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't need a second for that, do I?
We need to...
In relation to...
Yeah, we need to...
In relation to urgent business, the procedure is that councillors consider whether the item meets the definition of urgent business under the meeting protocol, and secondly, that the substance of your motion is then debated and voted upon.
Can I, Mayor, as a point of clarification, ask for the definition under our meeting procedure protocols to be read out so
Sure.
we can be clear what it is?
It's not the most helpful of definitions because it is somewhat circular, but the way it is currently written is that urgent business means business that, because of its urgency, cannot reasonably be listed in the agenda of the next meeting. So the issue here is whether this could be considered to fit within that definition, or whether it could be listed at the agenda of the next ordinary council meeting.
Councillor Lawrence, I probably might make a suggestion to you. It probably, like you said, it's not urgent until next month or the month after, but I'm sure that our CEO, Mr Lancaster, was probably taken on notice. or you can bring it back as a notice of motion in the future.
Mr Mayor, without dwelling on it for too long, there is an urgency about this matter. We've had 46 days of virtually non-rain in the city of Moonee Valley, other than a few sprinkles overnight, and there is an urgency for this matter.
So,
Through the chair, the item's for council's consideration as to whether it's an item of urgent business, first of all, rather than I comment on that.
I need a second.
sorry. Oh.
No, you've already spoken. So
I haven't spoken. I asked a point of clarification, which I was
Point of
going to seek
clarification?
more
Sorry.
clarification. But
Okay, you want more clarification?
in relation to the urgency of this motion, again, I'm very happy to support the idea of more watering, but we obviously need to debate the urgency.
Sure. Okay.
Now, have we had reports that trees are about to die before the next council meeting that would require watering in the interim? I'm not sure whether that's to Steve or, sorry, to Mr Lambert.
Through the chair, our staff continually monitor the effectiveness of trees and any stress they're under, so they would take note of that anyway, I'm sure, as with our sports grounds as well.
So no imminent reports of imminent tree death.
That's correct, Councillor Marshall.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we've probably talked about this too much. What I'll do, I'll put that to the vote to make it whether it's a. And I'm sorry, I need a seconder for that. So who will second that motion? Second, the urgency of what Councillor Lawrence is requesting. Sure.
Thank you, Councillor. That the council officers provide extra watering to small trees and shrubs in the Moonee Valley City Council during the months of March and April, unless we receive adequate rainfall in the meantime.
Do I have a seconder? Is that a whatever or? Yes, it's okay. Okay, we have a seconder. So what I'll do, I'll put that to the vote to see whether it is appointed.
Sorry, Mayor, can we speak to the matter of the urgency?
Okay, all right, we'll speak to the matter of urgency then. Who would like to speak to the matter of urgency? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've had over 46 days, as I've already commented, of no rainfall other than a sprinkle.
Mr Mayor, sorry, we're just debating the urgency.
Yeah, just the urgency. We can't.
Are we not to speak to the urgency
No,
through
no.
comment?
All you've got to do is speak why it's urgent, not.
Well, I'm giving you the whys. The reasons have to be adequately explained to clarify the urgency, do they not?
No, the reason why it's urgent you have to speak to. Why it can't wait.
Okay. Do we want shrubs and small trees dying in our municipality, on our nature strips, in our parks? We have a lot of small trees that get planted. We're trying to encourage this as part of our treeing of our municipality. From what I understand, that's a great urgency that the CEO has laid on us in great detail, and I certainly support that. I certainly don't want to see small trees and shrubs dying because of the lack of rainfall. So that is the reason for the urgency. If we leave it for another 2 weeks, we will possibly lose more trees than gain. So unless we have rain. Now, I don't know if anybody here is a diviner of rainfall. I wish I was, but I'm not. And therefore, I don't have that ability to give you an explanation as to what the rainfall will be in the next 2 months in the city of Moonee Valley.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Sharp.
I'm happy with that explanation. I don't need that.
Would any other person Councillor Nation?
I will, and in my decision of whether it's a matter of urgent business, I just need to seek some clarification from, through the chair, from officers. First of all, officers, or asked through the chair, do we have an issue in Moonee Valley with the provision of water? Do we have a water supply issue?
Through the chair, no, I'm not aware of a water supply issue at this stage.
Second point I would like clarified to determine if this is said urgent business. is this something that requires direction of council, or is this something that falls within the organisational realm of Moonee Valley City Council?
Through the chair, it's something that we monitor on an ongoing basis in relation to the condition of trees, and as I said before, also our sports fields as well. So we would make appropriate arrangements if it was an issue that we perceived through our staff.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, no,
For a matter to be urgent and not to be thank you. Obviously, it means that within the 2-week cycle that we have till the next council meeting, that unless this is acted upon, there will be some dire consequences. Now, I think this might be something that Councillor Lawrence could bring as a notice of motion at the next council meeting. But in the absence of evidence to show that our trees are dying in the next 2 weeks, and that we're going to have nature strips that are just full of barren and dead trees, I just don't see the urgency. And I suppose for me there's an issue around the certainty too of the motion. What does it mean in terms of extra watering? Like, what does that actually require? What's adequate rainfall? I actually don't know how this would be implemented, and perhaps that's a point of clarification in relation to the mover of, or potential mover of the motion, and maybe that's something that if it gets approved as urgent business then can be considered then. But I mean, urgent business is meant for things that just cannot wait, and I haven't seen anything which would indicate that that's the case.
Thank you. Any other councillor? I'd like to say a few words too. I got up this morning at 3 o'clock to go to work, and it was absolutely pouring in East Keilor. So I think East Keilor is pretty okay with watering. So, but I'm not too sure about the rest of the city. But I understand your point of view, and there are shrubs and trees that might need watering. But I think just by having the discussion, I think Mr. Lancaster and the staff will revisit the monitoring process. I'm sure that will be adequately watered if there's a shortage of rain. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My concern is for the greening of our city, not to ensure that we know how much rain is going to come, or whether or not we had a shower last night. And I think it's good that we did have a shower last night, because certainly the city needs it. It was just and I'm not here sitting here as a botanist, and I certainly don't have any direct contact with the meteorology department to predict what rainfall we will have in our area, and I certainly, for me, that's not what this is about. This is about the protection of our greening within the municipality, looking after.
I think there's it's not a closing speech. It's just a couple of words.
Yes, well, thank you for the opportunity. So that's just in reply to,
thank you,
maybe the comments.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? A matter of urgent business.
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypeck, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Gauchi-Marici.
Thank you, councillors. The motion is lost. Confidential reports. Next item of business is confidential reports. And councillors, we have 2 confidential reports this evening. Councillors, do I have a motion that this meeting go into camera to consider the matters which contain information relating to contractual and other matters? Councillor Byrne, do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. As confidential items under Section 89 of the Local Government Act, at this point we would like to say goodbye to those of you who have been watching on the live stream of this meeting and on Facebook live via our website. I'd also like to ask members of the public here in Council and Chambers to note that this concludes the open portion of this Council meeting tonight, and thank you to our live stream members for watching. Good night.